Dreamers Awake, Chapter 13. First, Lydia felt the throbbing in her head. She could feel the steady thumping, dumbed down to a dull throb by painkillers, but still there nonetheless. She hadn't been dreaming for once. The last thing she remembered was seeing the ghost on the underground tour. Then it was just blackness. She was thankful for small miracles. "I'm so tired of dreams and ghosts," she thought to herself. She opened her eyes, and Aunt Maggie was next to her. Her face was worried and looked old. She had a book open on her lap, but she stared off vaguely in the direction of the door. The room was dim, the only light a small lamp next to the bed illuminating Aunt Maggie's neglected book and dull sunshine filtering through the curtains. Something felt wrong about the scene. Aunt Maggie's movements were smooth, but they weren't sharp. It seemed everything was surrounded by a haze. Aunt Maggie's eyes moved towards her, looking at her, and her entire countenance changed. She lit up and stood quickly, but also slowly. "She's opened her eyes," she shouted. "I've got you," she heard in her head. "I've got you now." Lydia jerked awake, and a similar scene greeted her gaze. Aunt Maggie in a chair, forgotten book in her lap, but the room was bright, not dim. The overhead fluorescents buzzed unevenly, and the curtains were wide open, letting in the overcast but bright light of the clouded Seattle sky. Aunt Maggie stared at the door, but not in a vague way. She looked like a waxed statue. Her head turned jerkily to Lydia, but when she had fully shifted her gaze, she didn't say anything. Her face didn't light up. She simply stared blankly like some kind of robot. "What happened to me?" Lydia asked. "What happened to you?" Aunt Maggie repeated. Lydia was horror-struck. It was happening again. She felt her eyes sting, and she moaned. Aunt Maggie repeated the noise questioningly. Matilda was there. She had melted out of the wall and was approaching Lydia. Her eyes seemed less yawning and black now, less like an abyss to fall into. "She's taking shape again," Lydia thought. Again? Again? What did that mean, again? Lydia felt panicky as she moved closer and closer still. And as she approached, Lydia knew, deep in her bones, that she couldn't let Matilda touch her. If she touched her, she wasn't sure. Matilda was by her bed now, had crossed in front of the wax statue of Aunt Maggie, and was reaching out to her. Lydia felt physically weak and tried to make a noise, but it all caught in her throat. Please stop," Lydia groaned as she squeezed her eyes shut, tears leaking out. "Stop what, honey?" Aunt Maggie was suddenly there, right by her bed, right where the girl had been. Her jerky movements gone, the repeating apparently finished. "She's awake!" Aunt Maggie shouted as she hit the nurse call button. Lydia wasn't sure what to say. She felt like an insane person. How could she tell her aunt what had been happening to her since the day she arrived in Seattle? Really tell her about all the nightmares and the haunting of the house? How it had just gotten worse knowing that Aunt Maggie had had a daughter. "Lydia, hun, you look like you've seen a ghost." The cliché left her aunt's lips, and Lydia knew she had to tell her. It wouldn't stop unless she told her aunt. But she simply didn't know how. How do you tell your aunt her dead daughter is haunting the house? What if she brought up the bad memories again and Aunt Maggie sent her away? It suddenly occurred to Lydia that that was the very worst thing that could happen to her, being sent away. But she couldn't remember why. Was there no one else to take her? Why did she suddenly feel so deeply that it was imperative that she stay? She didn't have much time to ponder the question as a doctor and nurse came into the room. "Hello, Lydia. I'm Dr. Carnell, and this is Nurse Becca. She's been looking after you," the doctor said. She had a slim tablet cradled in her arms, and she tapped at it while she made introductions. "Hello," Lydia said. "What happened, Lydia?" her aunt asked. Lydia vowed to talk to her aunt about everything later. Now she had to focus on getting the doctors to release her from the hospital. It was a strange thing, but she felt certain that the longer she stayed in the hospital, the worse off she would be. She knew it, but she didn't know why that was. "I'm not sure. Tyler and I were doing the underground tour, and I thought I saw something in a corner. It surprised me, I guess, and I fell. She felt the back of her head. Then I guess I hit my head and passed out? Tyler, what had happened to Tyler? The doctor exchanged a look with Aunt Maggie. That's close to what was reported by your friend Tyler, Dr. Carnell said, looking over the tablet. But he didn't report it as being as instantaneous as you say. He says there was quite a long pause and that you stared into the corner for a while and then passed out before you hit your head. He said he was sorry, Aunt Maggie put in. He tried to catch you, but you went down so suddenly. To his credit, even though he didn't manage to stop the fall completely, he did cut off your momentum. What could have been a cracked skull is merely a hard knock on the head, the doctor said. Crap. Her injuries were probably severe enough to keep her here at least overnight. Why was she so anxious to leave? Weren't hospitals supposed to be safe places? Oh, wow. Well, I don't remember that. I just remember being surprised, then scared, then, nothing. Lydia shrugged and tried to look innocent and not crazy. The doctor looked unconvinced. Well, I suppose a head injury would confuse things, the doctor muttered down at what Lydia now assumed was her charts on the tablet. I think you should stay at least the night so we can observe and monitor that head injury. You do seem confused about events, but it also seems mild. Overnight should do the trick. As long as nothing major happens, you should be out of here tomorrow afternoon. Lydia's face fell. I have to stay overnight? She asked. Her throat had tightened. All she could think about was the ghost girl repeating, I've got you. I've got you now. She was terrified. She would be taken, stolen away. Here in the hospital wasn't safe. She had to get away, but she couldn't. The doctor clicked the tablet screen off and held it under her arm. Not to worry, she said. We've got cable and half-decent food. It won't be as bad as you think. Aunt Maggie patted her hand. I can run to the house and get anything you want, she offered. If there's anything special you want from your room or some magazines. Aunt Maggie trailed off. No, I don't want you to leave, Lydia said. It felt like the ghost would have more power if Aunt Maggie left. What about your phone charger? Maybe you'd like to text with your friends, Aunt Maggie offered. No, they haven't really kept in touch, and I'm not close enough with friends here yet. Lydia looked down at her hands. Why hadn't her friends been in touch? Her and Steph had been so close, and then suddenly she wasn't responding to texts or answering the phone. It was as if she'd never known Steph. Even the memory of her was fuzzy. Strange, very strange that she was having such a difficult time remembering her life in L.A. Had she been in L.A.? Of course she had. That's where she'd grown up. It's where she was born. But when she thought back on those years, those 16 years living in L.A., there was nothing now. Nothing but a deep blackness, and she felt so alone, and it was silent. She shivered and tried to come back to the here and now. Aunt Maggie was asking her something else, but all she could hear was faint laughter and the repeated, I've got you. I'll get you soon. I've got you now. The faint whisper of those words was worse than the shout of them in her face. The whisper was so certain. There was no need for volume or menace because they were certain. Honey? Aunt Maggie had a hand on her shoulder. What? What? Lydia asked. Where'd you go? Aunt Maggie looked in her eyes. What do you mean? I'm right here. Lydia tried to keep the annoyance out of her voice. Aunt Maggie had noticed anyway. She dropped her hand, sighing and lowering her eyes. You looked like you were a million miles away, Aunt Maggie said. She sounded frightened and small. Do you want a hot chocolate from the cafeteria? Your hands are freezing. Lydia felt ashamed for making her aunt feel bad. Yes, I'd love one. No whipped cream, though, Lydia said. Aunt Maggie gave a small smile and nodded. She left the room, saying she'd be right back. Lydia would have to tell her what had really been going on, how bad her dreams actually were. Eventually, but first she had to make it through her hospital stay.